Center Court is, of course, all about your goals and dreams for business school and where the MBA might fit into that pathway. And of course, with the different admissions panels that we organize, admissions offices that are looking at all of that hard work and the smarts that have brought you, through this early stage of your career. But post-MBA potential is measured not just on how well you perform, but on how well you manage people, whether you can build networks of influence and share your innovative and visionary thoughts and ideas. Those are not my words. Those words come from the Accelerated Learning Center, right at the heart of the Tepper School of Business at CMU. And I'm delighted to welcome the Executive Director of the Accelerated Leadership Center, Leanne Meyer. Leanne, it's lovely to have you with us.
Hi, Mike. Very excited to be here. Thank you.
We so often talk about the MBA and leadership, almost synonymous, and it really has been your focus, of course, yes, and dedicating a center to leadership. So perhaps big picture and the emphasis at Tepper that you place on leadership development.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. We're very excited with the emphasis we place on leadership development. I came from industry, as does everyone in our center, because it was important for us when looking at leadership that we develop, to your point, students who are going to be very successful post-MBA in the places they work. And what was interesting to me when we first benchmarked against other schools was a lot of schools talk about leadership development, but what it means is they do something in curriculum on leadership and they maybe have a club leadership role. And what to me was very exciting at Tepper is exactly as you pointed out, we have a dedicated center that focuses on leadership development of our students. And what's very exciting is that all students are required to meet 3 leadership requirements through our center. So we work with students on their leadership journeys, both, and I'm sure we'll talk more about what that looks like from workshops, but our center is a dedicated center focused on leadership development of our MBA students. And we have, which is unusual, embedded leadership coaches. So we have permanent coaches who are part of the team who all come from industry. So we don't hire coaches on an ad hoc basis who come in and out. Our students get to know our coaches and our coaches walk the leadership MBA journey with them. So I think it's very exciting, as I think that's very unique compared to the other schools when it comes to leadership development.
Right. When those MBA students arrive on campus, and of course we hope that in September this year that will again become a reality at the beautiful new business school campus that you have. Yes. As you look at either their expectations around the idea of leadership development, or perhaps even what it means to them on a personal level, do you see some sort of disconnect and then think, you're going to be in for a wonderful surprise?
Yes, well, I think it actually starts before our students even get on campus. So what we do for every student coming in, all our students complete an EQ assessment, an emotional intelligence assessment, because of the strong links between an emotionally intelligent, savvy leader and those who are not. So we know there's a strong correlation between strong EQ and effective leadership. And so our students, before they arrive on campus, they take an EQ leadership assessment so that as soon as they arrive, they can start meeting with our coaches and debriefing their assessment. That happens in our orientation program. We debrief the assessment and students decide what they'll work on as leadership development. And the disconnect is, as you can imagine, we have unbelievably smart, bright students from all over the world who have always really been good at so many things. And so when they get the results of their EQ assessment, which is only shared with them, we don't share these broadly, they're always disappointed. They kind of feel they failed leadership in some way because they just assume that they'll be really effective in all these skills. And I think for our students, it's a big eye opener to go, oh, wow, like there's a lot of development within these areas that I never thought that I would really need to focus on. So I think there's often sort of a misconstrol between being highly effective at your role and being a good leader. And so we actually start that before students even get on campus. So it's funny, as we talk, I've had emails this week from students who'll be joining us in August going, oops, can we talk about this assessment and who sees the results? So I think that's the disconnect, is that I think students just in many ways would assume, like so many things in their lives, they're going to be highly effective at this, and then realize maybe they're not. So that's the disconnect we see.
Right. You when talking about leadership, you've said in the past, the importance of owning your own career, because nobody else is going to do that for you.
Yes.
The fact that, you know, you've gone to the length of ensuring that it's personal coaching,
Yes.
because this
Yes.
isn't a one size fits all. We
No,
can do this in the
no,
lecture
no.
theatre.
Yes.
You really, what do you see as the sort of the key element to providing that personal level of guidance?
Yeah, I think, Matt, what we felt very strongly about, and you see this with your work, is that the students who arrive on campus are so diverse in their leadership experience. So we have vets who come on campus who have led massive numbers of people in very complicated situations. And we have students who arrive on campus who've never led a team or a project. And so what was very important to us philosophically is that for us, leadership development starts with where students are. So you come in, we do your assessment, our coaches work one-on-one with you, saying over your time with us, whether that's part-time or full-time, who do you want to be as a leader? What does that look like? What skills do you need? And how do we work with you? And then we make workshops available, coaching available. So it's a highly custom process with students having full access to coaches. And it may sound crass to talk about it in this way, but if you think of the fortune people pay in industry to have access to executive coaches, we have them on campus and students make appointments as they would like to work with them over their time period. And so that type of resource is available to work one-on-one with you on the very skills that are important to you. And our students come in at very different places in terms of leadership maturity and exposure and development.
It's a tremendous gift that you're then offering to them. We've framed this particular Centre Court Festival around ethics and responsible leadership. Do you see those two as synonymous and inseparable?
I think absolutely. And I think what the school does, I can talk more about the center from, we come at ethics largely from an empathy perspective. And I'm sure we'll talk more about the skills around empathy that are important for students. But what we do as a school is we run a core course that all students have to attend called Leadership and Ethics. And it's taught by Professor Taiwan Kim. And the focus of this, because I think this is what gets murky with ethics, is we are not interested in saying there is one right way to act. Who are we to make that assumption? What we do teach through this course and through our programming on decision making in our Accelerate Leadership Center are, what are the flaws around ethical decision making? I think many of us like to think of ourselves as ethical, like to think we're making ethical decisions, but what can go wrong in that process? So we teach that. And in this core program as well, we focus on what are the ethical implications of managing people, teams, and organizations, because we know that's what our students are going to do. And so our hope is to foster critical thinking around that in our students, as opposed to saying, this is what we think an ethical leader looks like. We want our students to make sense of that for themselves.
Right. You've already alluded to the wonderful diversity that you then bring together in the Tepper MBA classroom.
Yeah.
And in this increasingly global business landscape, that idea of working across different cultures and the communication that goes with it. So how do you then support students, to lead others who might be very different from themselves?
Yeah. What to me, I'm very excited that in the last 2 years, because to your point, I think we're working in increasingly diverse environments where for leaders to be effective, they have to understand the other, what's important to them, what motivates them, how they work. And so what we've done as a center is focus very aggressively, is probably the wrong word, but we focus on empathy as foundational to an effective leader. And we assess for empathy. We can assess students coming in, how empathic they are or not. We run workshops on empathy. We do coaching around empathy. We feel empathy is almost, to use an American expression, a superpower for leaders. That's what makes an effective leader. And so empathy is where most of our activities are focused as a leadership sense. And we do that traditionally, as I've said, workshops, coaching. But what we've been experimenting with, because we're very nervous about empathy just being a set of behaviors. So we don't want people to go, oh, I'm acting empathic now, so I'm going to nod my head, have eye contact, listen. We want students to foundationally be empathic. And what we've experimented with in the last three years is a program called Tepper Reads. And what we found is research is showing us that you can develop empathy by identifying with fictional characters over time. And so we actually read books of fiction together. So we run something called Tepper Reads, which is a community project, and students opt in. So for those who are listening going, oh, I don't want to read fiction as part of my MBA, they do not need to do this. But what we find is fascinating is we're very intentional about the books we choose, and students learn to identify with characters who are not who they are over time. So we've run that programming. Last year, we did something which we're very excited about called the Curiosity Project. And it's a structured way of helping students engage with students who they normally would not through a series of very pointed questions. And we know curiosity is vital for business, but we're finding it very interesting from an empathy development perspective. And this year, I can't give it away, but we're launching a program called Common Humanity. It's this idea that, yes, we're very different and we need to understand one another, but there's a lot that is common to us. And so that's going to be a lot of our focus this year. So those are what we do as the center. What I'm also excited about is every year we recruit about 20 second-year full-time MBA students to be communication coaches. We feel it's that important to know how to talk to the other in a way that you can be heard and you hear others. And it's a competitive process. Students apply, we develop them as coaches. They're paid to be coaches. We have our leadership coaches and we have these communication coaches. And you can imagine our communication coaches come from all over the world because they represent our student base. So we have a very global group of communication coaches focusing on communication skills with our students. So that's at a very tactical level is also how we work on the behaviors and the skill development around intercultural communication.
You mentioned sort of fictional characters and reading books. You've also commented in the past on the idea of drawing inspiration perhaps from art, an artist who questions the status quo. Is that ability to question what might be going on around you sort of a core skill for a good leader?
Yes. We thank you that you've read and listened to the other work we're doing. So we were very grateful. We were given a very generous gift by a donor, and we've really explored how do we introduce arts into the MBA experience and other interdisciplinary experiences as a way for students to your point, to think differently, to think critically. We think all this programming focuses on what we would call sense making and critical thinking. And by art, we're doing it in novel ways. And so another example of this type of programming is we've worked to, our students conduct our band. We have this beautiful orchestra on campus. And so students have done programming where they just understand what it feels like as an embodied conductor to feel differently. So we're finding very interesting ways of using programming to do exactly what you've said, to think critically about the world very differently and to build self-awareness. We often don't have this self-awareness until you stand in front of an orchestra with a baton going, how do I conduct and what does this teach me about myself? So so critical thinking is vital for the type of programming we do, as well as sense making and empathy.
I'm going to make sure I check the Tepper Instagram account for these photographs of MBA students with baton in hand.
It's beautiful. We do have beautiful pics of those. Yeah.
And I suppose an orchestra also then speaks to, between strings and it's that diversity of teams that you will be leading.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So you've had the chance to witness the journey, sort of 2 years of an MBA student coming in. Do you have any sort of favorite stories, or as you think of an individual, just at that personal level, the path that they have followed and what they've perhaps discovered about themselves?
I think we've seen some wonderful stories. I think the students I think of are perhaps students, because of the link of Center Court to Poets and Quants, perhaps students who've been featured by Poets and Quants. So if listeners want to look them up, they could look them up on your platforms. And so one of the students that I worked on in my very first experience of working with the center was Samantha Grant. And so I would encourage everyone to look up her story on the Poets and Quants platform. And what we saw with Samantha, and this to me is exciting, is when we actually get to work with a student who wants to flex their leadership muscles while on campus. She came to Tepper and she felt we were not doing enough in the women's leadership space, and she wanted to create an annual conference. And so in her she did this. She pulled all the resources together, supported by a center, and we ran our first Tepper Women in Business conference. I think it was 6 years ago. And this now has become an annual staple. But in that very first year, we had 200 women from across MBA programs in the country, really immersed on what it was to be an early career professional. So she's someone who comes to mind. So what I'm very excited about is when we see students who are inspired to take up initiatives and we can support them as leaders. But that to me is all well and good. How we like to measure ourselves as a center is, what do the promotion opportunities look like post MBA? Because in many ways, we feel part of our role as a center is to help people understand themselves as a leader. But afterwards, does your environment verify that in a sense? Does your environment go, yes, you are a leader? And so the two recent students I think about, and it's more, they're on your Poets and Quants website, is Andrew Solomon and Christy O'Hara. And what we saw with them is that within the time period they started working with the center, these are part-time students at work while they're studying, and they each received more than one promotion over that period, moving from very technical roles into managing people and projects. And they attribute that specifically to the team, to the Accelerate Center. And so that to me is exciting, is when we see, not only are we seeing that growth, but an organization is saying, we're starting to see you grow in confidence and use leadership skills you've not, and we would like to reward that, promoting you into managing people and teams. So I think there are lots of those stories, but those are just some I think of who your listeners could go and read their stories on Poets and Quants platforms.
Right. So, I mean, whether Samantha, Andrew, many other of their classmates, there's often this celebration of the exuberant, charismatic leader, but you can be a very quiet,
yes,
equally successful leader. That's important too.
Yeah. We spend a lot of time working with our students. As you can imagine, given the nature of our university and who would be attracted to come to our university, many of our students identify as introverts. They see themselves as introverts, and they see themselves as quiet leaders. And so we know from all the research in this space, you just, if not more so effective than others if you're quiet, to use another expression. And so a lot of our programming is around how we help students who feel that their voice is not being heard. What are the ways you do that in environments to be an effective leader? So absolutely, we focus on that. Our students question that a lot. And to your point, I think we've seen in the US specifically, a kind of charismatic leader that's been sort of shared as a model. And that's why we're not interested in going, this is a stereotypical model of leadership. We're like, who are you? How are you going to be successful? What's your aspiration for leadership? And how do we work with you? Knowing that many introverted, more quiet leaders are going to take up their roles very differently to charismatic leaders.
And with that, perhaps this idea of, as you've said in the past, learning to be terrified. It's you don't have to have all of the answers, but it's just that ability, perhaps to it's not just projecting confidence. It's how you feel.
I agree. What to me is interesting is one of the most important skills we think and encourage our students to work on. And for any of the students listening, how do you develop as a leader? And I think you develop as a leader by truly embracing discomfort. To be a leader is to stretch yourself. To be a leader is to put yourself out there. And the minute you put yourself out there, you feel vulnerable, you feel self-conscious. But that's the only way to grow as a leader is to really stretch yourself. And so to me, if listeners are thinking, how do I develop as a leader? I would think almost daily is, how do you embrace this? How were you uncomfortable today? How did you stretch yourself? And what did you learn from that? So that's very important to us. And the other thing we really encourage our students to do, and it's just top of mind because we're going to be doing a lot of work on this next week, is how much do you seek out feedback and how receptive are you to feedback? In the sense that to be an effective leader, you really need to be constantly getting feedback on where you're being successful, where you're not, what's resonating, what's not, are people feeling heard? And so those are two things that I would just challenge all the listeners to your show to really think through. how am I uncomfortable today, and have I sought out feedback? We know people don't get enough feedback. You have to actually go and find it. So are you seeking feedback, and are you receptive to it? Would be another sort of, apart from being terrified, I would ask people to go and seek feedback, and that in itself can be terrifying, but it's the only way to grow.
Right. And with feedback, I suppose, holding up a mirror to yourself. Now, the application process to Tepper is this opportunity perhaps to step back and think about, where business school fits, the next steps of your career. Now, that often translates into perhaps, imagining specific roles in a company or a career path, rather than, the kind of person or the leader that you want to be. So what advice would you have for applicants as they begin that journey of self-reflection?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I think as you think about leadership development, initially as a center, what we focused on so much because we think it's important is that in many ways, leadership is a set of behaviors, and they can be learned and practiced and coached. And so we focus very much on these are the behaviors. This is what best practice looks in those behaviors. Let's practice, let's coach you. But at the same time, the leaders that we know are successful are the leaders who think about who they want to be. So it's almost like you have to build these behaviors on your identity as a leader. And so this comes to your question, I think, around reflection, in that who you are is really how you lead. And if you're not thinking about who you are, then you have no idea about how you lead. And the problem, though, and I'm sure your listeners are feeling this, applying through to an MBA is so consuming. And then when you're doing an MBA, it's all consuming. So it's so hard how do you create the space to be reflective? Because being reflective takes space. And so what we've done in the Accelerate Leadership Center is created what we call the Leadership Development Certification process. It's opt-in, so students can choose to opt into this program. What's interesting, and this goes to your point, our students know they need this. So 50% of our class opts into this program. And what this program does is takes them through a process of identity development. It helps them think through, who am I? What are my values? What is important to me? What would be a good internship? Who do I want to be afterwards? How do I want to lead? What is the style? And so it's almost, you need to create a structured way of reflecting on yourself, because our lives are deeply consuming. It's very hard to spend time thinking about who you want to be. But I feel if you don't address both aspects of this, yes, the skills, but at the same time, ultimately, to me, leadership development is identity development. And it's who do you want to be and how do you want to lead are vital questions these students should be asking. And I feel if they're doing an MBA, so many students are aspiring to positions of leadership post-MBA. And now is a perfect time to really be thoughtful about who you want to be in that process. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but that's how we think of identity development.
One of the things that I love about your work, and I can only imagine how this translates and the impact that it has on students at Tepper, sort of providing images for them to be able to sort of hold on to and then perhaps project themselves into those images. So perhaps my final question would just be to have you speak to the thought, not of this sort of typical career ladder that everyone thinks about, and of course the boost that the MBA from Tepper would provide. You've described it as a spiraling staircase.
Yeah.
How do you see that image?
Yeah, I think I've held on to the spiraling staircase in my life when I think of my own leadership development as a leader. And why I think of that is that, our aspiration is, I think, as humans and as leaders, is to consistently improve and be better and grow. But we do so with different levels of consciousness. So I can think I'm being very effective as a leader, and then I bump up on some things and I've got to kind of circle back and learn some more skills. So to me, the spiraling staircase for me as a leader makes me, when I feel I'm failing better, because I know I'm moving somewhere, but there's certain parts of my leadership skills that I need to revisit. And with each circle of the spiraling staircase, my hope is that I'm doing it at a different level of consciousness and skill level. And so that's how I hold on to the notion of leadership development. It's a helpful analogy for me, and I think for our students who work so hard and are so perfectionist that they don't want to fail. And so it's this idea, we're not failing, we may be circling back, but the aspiration is always upward.
Right, right. Well, I hope it's one of those big medieval, very wide staircases that Leonardo da Vinci and others were very good at imagining, because I think sharing that staircase with you during 2 years of the MBA at Tepper would be a wonderful opportunity. Leanne, thank you for joining us at the Centre Court Festival and sharing not just tremendous thoughtfulness, but I think real inspiration for any individual thinking about taking that next step.
Thank you so much, Matt. This was a lovely conversation. Thank you.